Now, for decades, he's operated at the highest levels of both Nigerian governance and global diplomacy, at the United Nations and at the very center of power in Abuja, shaping policy at home and representing the country on the world stage. Professor Ibrahim Gambari, one of Nigeria's most distinguished diplomats, is a former Minister of External Affairs, former Chief of Staff to President Buhari, a former United Nations Under-Secretary General, and Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General on African Affairs. He's also the founder of the Savannah Center for Diplomacy, Democracy and Development. But beyond these titles lies a more personal intersection. Professor Gambari is a son of Kwara State in the north-central region and also a Fulani, an identity that has increasingly been drawn into the national conversation, often controversially, as Fulani communities are accused of involvement in many of the violent attacks in the Middle Belt. That places him in a rare and difficult position, caught between a region under siege and an identity under scrutiny, even as insecurity in Nigeria's north-central region has become one of this country's most complex and emotionally charged challenges. So, drawing on decades of experience managing conflict, diplomacy and state power, how does he think this country can confront insecurity in the Middle Belt region and beyond, and indeed democracy in this country? And Professor Gambari, former UN Under-Secretary General, former Nigerian Minister of External Affairs, and former Chief of Staff to President Buhari, joins me now in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
It's really my pleasure, Charles, to be here. You may have noticed that I've avoided as much as possible this kind of exposure because I strongly believe that we've served in the last administration. That administration is over. There was no effort to elongate the power or to seek a third term, and so we should leave the stage and let the successor administration take the spotlight.
Well, we appreciate your humility, but we are of the opinion that you've made such an enormous contribution, not just to this country, but to the continent and indeed to the world. I mean, you've been on the world stage as well as domestically, that it is important to sample without being necessarily mean in your assessments, but honest and frank about where this country is going. And so we're very honored to have you here. Now, you recently said that Nigeria must strengthen democracy and good governance to shore up weak institutions ahead of 2027. Which institutions specifically worry you the most, and how weak are they today?
Political parties. That's the one that bothers me the most. Because if you have strong political parties, even the fear of Nigeria becoming a one-party state will not arise, because you have strong political parties that are responsible for determining the candidates for political office. Political parties that stand for something, that people can identify, have a distinct identity, and they have something to offer, and something against which their performance should be judged. Now, that's so much absent, and I'm very worried about that, even though I'm not of the belief that it's possible to establish a one-party state in Nigeria, because history does not support it. If you recall, the First Republic, the NPC became very strong and powerful. They were not responsible for the breakup of the Action Group, which was an opposition party, but they clearly did not discourage the disintegration. Wanted to be the dominant, if not the only party. It didn't work. We saw the end of that. The then MPN, which was a successor regime in a sense, at a time called themselves the superpower, MPN the superpower. In the end, it didn't lead us to progress. Then you have the PDP that with some form of intoxication at one time said, we're going to rule for 60 years. Well, you know the end of that. So I'm not afraid that this country has too many talents, too many political, they're ambitious, in a positive sense, that cannot be accommodated within a one-party state. But nonetheless, I believe that if we were to work for a system whereby it's not winner take all, we must then have think about proportional representation. But you cannot have proportional representation unless you have strong political parties. So it is that the weakness of that bothers me the most. And I believe that Savannah Center, the Center for Democracy and Development, and other NGOs and civil society must work very hard to see, with all the stakeholders, to see that we reform our political and make them at least a starting point to be democratic. Internal democracy is critical because, as they say in Ilorin, if where I come from, that if somebody says is going to give you a babariga or agbada, you look at the one he's wearing because he's incapable of giving you what he doesn't have or something better than what he has. So the antidote to anti-democratic forces is more democracy, not less, starting from political parties.
Indeed, and I think that's a good point about political parties because they certainly give a lot of people cause for concern in this country. But beyond that, what about things like the Electoral Commission, INEC?
Absolutely, because they are the referee. And in many ways, the INEC must be like Caesar's wife, beyond suspicion. And maybe we should take a second look at how they are appointed, to ensure that they should be beyond suspicion. So, and beyond technical competence, they have to be people head of it that, and we used to go for judges for a good reason to be head of INEC before, because they felt because of their judicial temperament and training
and hopefully
integrity and justice, but that has not produced the right result. Then they say, well, let's go for professors. Because the academicians detached from the day-to-day hustle and bustle and partisanship or politics. But it's not really about judges or professors. It's about people of proven integrity and track record. And then we have to get the civil society to ensure that they stay in their lane. They stay in their lane.
And I suppose it all dovetails back to what you were talking about, the political parties, because it's not just the political parties, it's the politicians who populate the political parties. So because they're the ones who go out and try and influence those people. I mean, that's not saying that just because somebody attempts to influence you, you must succumb, but it's certainly half the job, isn't it? If you go and you start putting pressure on them, and in some cases even try to intimidate them.
Precisely, because unfortunately, many of our politicians don't actually believe in fair play either. As a matter of fact, if they lose election, no matter how free and fair, they blame the referees, So if I win, I win. If I lose, it's somebody else's fault. So that's scapegoating, but we must never leave room for even the scapegoating. But you are correct, that the rules of the game, we have to have people believe in the rules of the game. And that's why I keep coming back, that the antidote to anti-democratic forces is more democracy, not less, in political parties, in the institutions of governance, and even the role of the state and security agencies. Now, I was privileged not long ago to be head of a 120-man delegation of the ECOWAS to go and observe the presidential election in Senegal. Senegal is a much smaller country than us, but Charles, you will not believe the commitment of the political elite to free and fair play, the commitment to democracy, the absolute refusal to allow any president to alter the rules to favor them. They have proved it more than once. And you see how the Ministry of Internal Affairs is in charge of elections, just to show you how they believe that if you are there, you can be a ministry headed by a president or he will be president of a ruling party, but you have to do your duty because the electorate, there is a consensus. We want to have free and fair election and opportunity for people to cast their votes. And the security forces, you will not even see them. I went everywhere. They are doing their jobs discreetly. They are not intimidating anyone.
So that's an important element,
very important element. Just to facilitate, not to obstruct or not to intimidate.
So given all this that you've told us, and this is one of the reasons we really thought it would be great to talk with you, because I mean, here you've brought in the experience, for instance, of going to Senegal and all the rest of it, and I'm sure there's more to come. But strengthening institutions, which you've talked about, is a familiar refrain in Nigerian politics. I mean, what does that mean in concrete terms beyond rhetoric? I know you've mentioned the political parties, I know you've mentioned INEC, but how do you actually strengthen those institutions?
Well, but by strengthening the commitment of the larger population to strong institutions. Now, I'm a political scientist by training, although I specialize early in international relations, that power does not concede except by demand. So it's when we have this civic education, political education, encouragement by activists to insist. How did Senegal do this? Senegal, right there in ECOWAS.
But you'd have to have the will to want to make that change.
Absolutely, and then their leadership, the leadership has a key, because all movements. So I propose a movement for real democracy and strengthening of democratic institutions in our country, because it will not happen by accident.
Well, I mean, the problem here, as I'm sure you know, having been well, you are a political scientist yourself. You were chief of staff to a president. I mean, Nigeria's political elite often call for democracy while benefiting from institutional weaknesses. How do you reconcile that contradiction?
Well, because there are no consequences when they misbehave. There are no consequences. Let us take political parties again, something that I care about so strongly, and my Savannah Center is working on very strongly. Now, in some other structures across the world, because when I was Under-Secretary General for Political Affairs at the UN, I was in charge of electoral support for about 18 or so different countries. In some countries, if you move from one if you are elected to office on the platform of political party and you defect, your seat is declared vacant. Because, it's like if you go the other way, it's like now you are operating a false pretense. You are no longer kind of performing as what we voted for. So let's vote again for whoever we feel will represent us. So the point I'm making very seriously, there must be then consequences for the behavior that does not strengthen the institution. Where there are no consequences, it will continue. Because if you keep doing the same thing, continue and expect a different result, it's not going to happen. But it's not a job, and this is another point that I would like to make to fellow Nigerians. Don't expect that one person, Buhari or Babangida or Tinubu or Jonathan, will come with a magic wand and solve all our problems, political problems. It will not happen.
Yeah, but if you
they have responsibility to lead.
Yeah, but if you see demonstrated political will from them, people tend to gravitate in this country, and I'm sure you know that. They tend to gravitate towards the orbit of power.
That's true.
There is something about power that draws them like a magnet. And if a leader comes out and says, unequivocally, this is what I believe in, and I'm going to push this through with as much gusto as I can muster, I suspect that a lot of people will toe the line.
He will have to have allies. Now, I'm not trying to...
Yeah, but you're the one, he's the one who appoints people.
It's true.
You appoint people to your cabinet.
Yes,
you appoint people in your,
But beyond the cabinet, I mean, the outside the cabinet. And again, I'm not doing a commercial for the dead, which is President Buhari. But, when his party lost the election in Edo State, he congratulated the winner and invited them to come on, and he told them, look, I'm APC, my party lost the election. I take responsibility, but I congratulate you. Reluctantly. So that's leadership.
Yeah, and but let me ask you this, and I don't mean to interrupt you, since you brought up President Buhari. I mean, you served at the heart of government as chief of staff to President Buhari. Looking back, Where did that administration fall short in strengthening institutions that you're talking about now? Did Nigeria miss a critical window to entrench democratic norms during that period?
They did, and you know why? Buhari was a convert. He was a military dictator. I served as his foreign minister, and he came a democratically elected president. Tried 4 times. Only on the 4th attempt, he became a convert. And usually, a convert to a religion is often even more fervent than those who are born into it. But I used to say that in his past, he used to lock people up, and it's up to them to prove themselves, presume them guilty, and they have to prove themselves innocent. But he now realized that, well, under this system, people you can't just lock anybody up, and you will not presume them guilty, and they have to prove themselves. I wish we had taken advantage. When I say we, the people of Nigeria, have taken advantage of that late convert to democracy and work with him. Now, but of course, ultimately he takes responsibility for failures. But what have the people, done to strengthen? Okay, this is a new converted Democrat who went 4 times. Went to the Supreme Court after he lost 3 times. Follow the rules. How do we now, that signal, how do we now make it the norm rather than the exception? Now, many Nigerian politicians, sadly, they don't want fairness, they want advantage, So we have to now really re-educate, and the electorate must really have a big role to play.
So in that regard, do you think the foundations for a credible 2027 election are being laid now, or are we already behind schedule?
I think we're behind schedule, but it's not late, and leadership is key. Now, if the president were to insist that even if I lose election, I will respect the result in a free and fair process.
So if the president
and others, and the political leadership, you see, what is missing in also, permit me, Charles, is that there's no conversation between the political parties. Since when I feel seen in Nigeria that the leaders of all the political let's come together.
That's a good point.
Of Nigeria. And in this of strengthening democracy in Nigeria,
they usually sign some document when
about the election.
Yeah, at the election time, but that's about it.
They don't. They honor only when they actually by disrespecting it. But so leadership is critical. Trying to have a national consensus is true. Just because they are, why Senegal impressed me, there's a national consensus there. We will not allow any president to extend their stay beyond the constitutionally. What is it that the Senegal...
And that includes people who potentially benefit from the incumbent government.
Absolutely, but there's that consensus.
That's very impressive.
It's very impressive. What do they have more than we do in Nigeria? But they have more, which is the national consensus and commitment. And they're proving it. Abdul Diouf tried it. They said no. Make a saw. What? They said no. And they allow a ministry of government to conduct election. That shows they have. And I tell you what, digression. What is important? I was able to meet, I just left Myanmar, Burma on a UN assignment, and I was in Singapore as a visiting professor, one of the universities. And I was sitting next to the president of the chairman of the Public Service Commission of Singapore, and I asked him, what are your major challenges? Thinking that he would talk to me about recruitment, promotion, discipline. He said, no, we are beyond that. So I said, excuse me, then what do you do? He said, we go and identify talents from secondary school, and we mentor them, give them scholarship, and prepare them to live for leadership position of what Singapore will be in the next 25, 35 years.
That's brilliant.
And meritocracy is the commitment. So once it's clear to everybody that meritocracy is the national consensus, what we have to look about recruitment.
That's a very important point you make, Professor. And in fact, from what I understand, that's what Nigeria used to be like in the 1960s. Because Chief Emeka Anyoku was sitting where you were sitting a few months ago, and he told me on this program that the person who spotted him and identified him as a talent was the Tafawa Balewa, the former prime minister, who said this person and started courting him and saying, I want to bring you into the foreign service. And that's how he got into it.
Yeah, and that's what the leadership of that period did. They believe in mentoring. They believe in meritocracy.
Absolutely.
And to be honest with you, I feel pained that I'm a beneficiary of that commitment to meritocracy, not because I'm Fulani from Kwara, not because I belong to the, but they identified some of us and northerners and said, no, you people should go to King's College. Go and broaden your King's College Lagos. Before then, very few northerners were there. Broaden your knowledge of Nigeria and also prove that the northerners, they are not the stupid people that many southerners think they are. So this is the mentoring that is lacking, and commitment to meritocracy, and also having giants, in the system, in the civil service. You recall the era where they called super PAMSEC. These were they didn't just. It's not ascriptive. They earned it. They were trained. They were mentored. They have record of achievement. Now, look at our institution. Where are the giants?
Indeed. Well, let me change direction slightly, because you've described the North Central zone where you come from as both the most southern part of northern Nigeria and the most northern part of the south. How has this identity, if you like, ambiguity affected that region?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. There's a third dimension I always say. We're the most southern part of the north, the most northern part of the south, but we also live in the middle of the country.
Indeed.
Now, we have to be committed to the ideal of Nigerian unity, because God forbid that it breaks. Where are we going to belong? You just introduced me. Am I Fulani? Am I Yoruba? What am I? Who am I? And that's why I also had some argument with some people from the North Central, because often the Middle Belt is equated to being a Christian belt. But it's not a Christian, Middle Belt is not a Christian belt. North Central is not a Christian, it's an amalgamation of everything Nigerian is in the North Central. Muslims, Christians, Fulanis, Hausas, you'll be surprised. In Nasarawa, you have the emir of Lafia was originally Kanuri, So the microcosm of Nigeria is right in the Middle Belt, but often it's become politically an orphan. Although I must say, coincidentally, of the three most prominent chiefs of staff to the heads of states of Nigeria, guess where they come from? From North Central and from Ilorin. You had Babatunde Diagma, Chief of Staff, General Mohammed, Abdullahi Mohammed, Chief of Staff to two presidents. Yours truly, Chief of Staff. It's not an accident.
It's very, very interesting. But I mean, we're almost out of time, which is really sad. You see why it's great to have somebody like you here. It's been a great conversation. But having advised the UN on African conflicts, what warning signs in the North Central region remind you of crises elsewhere on the continent that were ignored until they escalated?
Yes, not addressing the root causes of conflicts. Because when you have wrong diagnosis, you will have wrong prescriptions, and the patient is not good. And if you look at Darfur, you look at Sudan, you look at Rwanda, and two places where I've had particular engagement as a UN staff, is by not addressing the root causes. Why are people discontent? And it goes back to governance, poor governance. People are talking about ungoverned spaces. There are poor governance more than ungoverned space. Because if you say ungoverned space, as if some places are well governed or governed, well, I don't know, but across the board, poor governance. and no consequence for bad governance, and always not putting the interest of the whole above that of the self-interest, and also extreme centralization of power. I have a theory, two theories, that either you share power or you will ultimately lose power.
That's a very good point.
If you share power or you will lose power. Then the second that I also preach is that people say power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Lord Acton. But the Gambari theory is prolonged absence from power also corrupts, because when those who have been excluded for so long get to power, their behavior leaves a lot to be desired. So inclusiveness, addressing root causes of problem, good governance, and making everybody feel a part of the whole, and recognizing, and this is the final point, that we may have different backgrounds and paths, but in this country, as well as in Africa, we have a common future. We have to prepare ourselves for it.
On that note, I want to thank you exceedingly. I wish we had more time. I could talk to you a lot more. There's a huge amount of wisdom there. But I thank you for the time that you've taken to come in here. Professor Ibrahim Gambari is a former UN Under-Secretary General, former Nigerian Minister of External Affairs, and former Chief of Staff to President Buhari. Thank you very much indeed.